Hello, everyone, and welcome to Johnny's Ambassadors Expert Webinar Series for Parents. I'm your host, Laura Stack. I'm the founder and CEO of Johnny's Ambassadors, where we educate parents and teens about the dangers of today's high-potency marijuana products, specifically as they relate to adolescent brain development, mental illness, and suicide, which is what happened to our son, Johnny, who died by suicide at the age of 19, sadly, after using high potency cannabis concentrates. So we are here with another expert guest today, whom I will introduce in just a moment after I go over a couple quick logistics. This session is being recorded. Please share it with all of your friends and family. We do have some handouts, which Bonnie has kindly provided. They are available in your control panel for those of you watching live, and for those of you on the recording, they are on this page where you are watching your recording. We are going to hear from Bonnie for 45 minutes of slides, after which she will take 15 minutes of your questions. So the lucky ones who are on live today, as you think of your questions, please type them into the question box in your control panel, and I will read them off to Bonnie in the order I received them at the end of our presentation. So let's introduce our guest today. Dr. Bonnie Halpern-Felsher is a professor in adolescent medicine in the Department of Pediatrics at Stanford University. She's also the founder and executive director of the Tobacco Prevention Toolkit and the Cannabis Awareness and Prevention Toolkit. Dr. Halpern-Felsher is a developmental psychologist with almost 200 publications to her name, and she is funded by the NIH and many foundations. She has been a staunch advocate for policies concerning tobacco and cannabis regulations for many, many years, and excitingly, just today, won an award from Stanford for her research. It is the best award you can get for clinical research, so we congratulate her for that. She is also the co-director of the Teaching Cannabis and Awareness and Prevention Conference, of which I was pleased to be a faculty member this year and present, and appreciate that invitation. Bonnie, thank you so much for being one of Johnny's ambassadors.
Well, thank you so much for having me here, Laura, and hi everybody who's live, and for those of you who are going to be watching this later through recording. Happy to be presenting here today. So I am going to talk about cannabis use among youth, some information for awareness and prevention. First, want to just quickly, and I won't go through everybody, but have you meet the team. There's actually one new member is not on this slide because I could not do all the work that we do without this amazing team. I also always want to give a very quick shout out to our funders, both the NIH and foundations, but also donors without whom we could not do our work. Two disclosures are important for me to say. One is that I am a scientist, an expert scientist in some litigation against the e-cigarette industries, and then also an unpaid expert in some city, state, and federal level policies. Let's talk about this. What are we talking about when we talk about cannabis products and the rates that are there? So there are many different cannabis products, or marijuana, I tend to use cannabis, but interchangeably, many different cannabis products that are on the market today. And I'm going to go through a few of these and give you some highlights about the importance of being aware of some of these products, particularly if they're being used by our young people. So first, let's talking about smoking, and this could be either generally combustible, but also inhaling in any way. So here we're talking about the joints, spliffs, and blunts. So joint is your standard cigarette style that's rolled in a cigarette wrapper or some sort of marijuana paper. Blunts, which is the middle one that you see there, this one is one that a lot of parents don't understand or know much about. In fact, teenagers don't either. They just know they're smoking something. But it's a cigar, it's very popular, and it's a cigar wrapper. And what people do is either they take a cigar and take out the marijuana buds, they take out the tobacco and put in the marijuana, or they buy a cigar wrapper and then wrap the marijuana within that. The problem is you're getting a double whammy. You're getting both the nicotine and all the chemicals that come from the tobacco, which is the cigar leaf, tobacco leaf, as well as in the form of the marijuana. And teens don't always realize that. And then the spliff, which is more of a combination of tobacco and marijuana. So what's important to know in these is that it takes about 5 to 10 seconds to feel the effect. So you get that high in about 5 to 10 seconds. And the high can last 30 minutes to several hours. And people don't always realize how long it can last. And the THC, which is, of course, THC is the psychoactive component within marijuana. The amount of THC and how potent that is, and we're going to talk about the high potency in a bit, really depends on the cannabis flower that is being used. Now, another very popular form of using cannabis amongst our teenagers today is vaping or aerosolizing. And we call it vaping, but it's really not a vapor, it's an aerosol that's coming in. And what's important to know about vaping is it's not harmless. A lot of teens say, oh, I'm not smoking, I'm not burning, I'm vaping, so it must be okay. No. Important to tell our teens anything that we breathe into our lungs that is heated is unhealthy. And right now we have to be concerned about our teens' lungs and our teens' brains. And we'll talk a lot about that, as well as their mental and physical health. But when we talk about teens' brains and lungs, they tend to listen a little more. All right, so the THC concentration here in vaping also depends on how much of the either wax or oil or bud is put in to that product. Now we've got pipes and bongs. We've had these, since I was a little kid and before. These are your standard that you burn the flower of the cannabis and then inhale in that smoke. And it is burning as opposed to vaporizing or aerosolizing. And it's similar, 5 to 10 seconds and lasts about 30 minutes for the high or a few hours. Now, dabbing, that is the one that I really want to talk about. I think, Laura, that was on your t-shirt as well. Dabbing is one of the products that I am most concerned about with teenagers today. It is highly, highly concentrated THC wax that's heated and then you breathe in that aerosol. It's about 80% THC concentration. It is high amounts of that psychoactive component. It is partly why we're seeing teenagers in the hospital today, why we're seeing teenagers suicidal, why we're seeing teenagers die, why we're seeing them so either psychotic or other things that are happening with them is this dabbing, this high concentration. And it's farmed and developed to have so much high concentration in there. Then we also have sprays and tinctures and capsules. We see these both in THC and in CBD. This one usually takes a little bit longer to feel the effect because it's not going directly into being inhaled into your lungs, into your bloodstream, and then into your brain, but it's more going through your GI system, your gut, and then through your body. So it could take about 15 minutes or a couple hours to feel the effect. And these products, even though they are in a form that looks like medicine, they are not regulated, and it's something that we need to pay attention to. And then finally, edibles, another form of marijuana that I'm very worried about with teens. These are your standard, we've had these for forever, the cannabis infused food and drink. So you take your brownie or your cookie, or nowadays they can come in gummy bears or anything like that. And they are food that or drinks that are infused with the cannabis and put in there. Why do I worry about this? Teenagers and all adults don't realize how much of the THC is in there. So I always say, imagine that you're making chocolate chips. I love to make chocolate chip cookies. And you're making chocolate chip cookies and you take your bowl of dough and you add in the chocolate chips and you mix it. And then you make cookies out of it. You know that some of the chocolate chip or some of the cookies are going to have a lot of chocolate chips and some not so much. It's hard to balance and get it perfect. Well, that's the problem with edibles. Especially if you make it at home. You may get a brownie bite or a taste with a lot of the THC and one with less. Now, in states that have recreational marijuana legalized, there's at least some regulation to make sure or control that the bites are pretty similar in the amount of THC that you get, but not perfectly. And so teens don't realize they could be varying in how much of the concentration of the THC they're getting. The other reason why I worry is Unlike the inhaled, it could take 20 minutes to 2 hours to feel the effect. So we have teenagers who take a bite and they don't feel it, whereas if they inhale it, they feel it very quickly. They think, huh, I didn't feel anything, so I'm going to take another bite. Huh, still didn't. So I take another bite. And by the time they feel it, they've overdosed. And I don't mean overdose in terms of dying. You don't die from this directly through it. You know, you do from other ways, but you don't directly. But it's more that you're going to get very sick and you don't realize, and you could get into a car or have mental health breakdowns or suicidality from it because you took so much and you didn't realize it. So when we talk to teens about edibles, it's really important. I mean, obviously we hope that they never use any of these products, period. But if they are going to, and we talk about edibles, we need to really explain that you may not feel that effect for a while and to wait that 20 minutes, because I'm worried that if they keep using, they're going to get sick and overconsume and wind up in the hospital. So what are the rates? Let's talk about the rates of use amongst our youth. So what you see before you is the 2019 national data from Monitoring the Future. It's a big national survey that goes out in schools every year or every couple of years. And this is looking at cannabis use amongst our youth. And what I want to point out in the latest data that have been published for 2019, I want to point out amongst our 12th graders, which are, around 17, 18 on average, you're seeing that about 44% have ever used and about 6% are using daily. That's a lot, and 22% in the past month. And then you can say, well, they're almost adults. Well, first of all, legal age to use these products in most states is either not at all or 21. So they're still under legal age. But even our 8th graders are using these. 15% of 8th graders have ever used, and 1%, while not a lot, when you look at the raw numbers, you're talking about millions of kids are using these products at least daily. So we are concerned about rates of these use of these products. Not only that, past 30-day use of both products together, tobacco and marijuana, is very high. So we see these are data from a paper that I actually published with some other groups in California. And we found that anywhere from 13 to 15% of adolescents were using marijuana only. But amongst those, anywhere from 7 to 11% were using both products. And both in terms of tobacco and marijuana, this could be both at the same time, meaning that they're literally using a blunt or spliff at the same time. But more, we're talking about teens who tend to use one product are also likely to use another product within the same day or same week or same month. And we also know that about 33% of high school students and 23% of middle school students who have ever used a vaping and a nicotine e-cigarette, so vaping nicotine, reported also using cannabis in that e-cigarette. We know this from a study that we published a couple years ago where we asked about Juul, using Juul, which is and was more the most popular nicotine vaping device. And about 20% of the teens in our study said, oh yeah, we break open the Juul and we add in marijuana and then we inhale it. So we know that the co-use is very common. And youth who vape nicotine are 3.5 times more likely to then use cannabis than teens who don't vape. So when we talk to our children, we talk to teens, when we talk about this, we cannot talk about cannabis or nicotine or vaping in isolation. We really do need to talk about it together, and we'll talk about that a little bit more at the end. So I just wanted to show you this picture right here, which is pre-COVID. It's how we keep talking about pre-COVID and post-COVID in terms of being a person or not. But these are pre-COVID. A school in California confiscated a bunch of the vaping products and then gave them to me to use to go do my teaching. And if you look here, what you see is a lot of those, a lot of the products on this left are marijuana. And what you also can tell is that you can't easily tell the difference between tobacco and marijuana vaping products. You have to look very carefully. The marijuana vaping products often have a little marijuana leaf, but it's not always easy to tell. And this is a video, hopefully this will work. This is a video that another school gave me of all the products they collected and confiscated. And you can also see a lot of these are marijuana products. So let's just talk about legalization briefly. The reason why I do this is because I want to also help you understand why we don't know as much about cannabis. So first of all, when we're talking about laws, tobacco in December of 2019, there was a law signed into across the US that nobody can purchase or really sell tobacco to anybody who's under the age of 21. Whereas with cannabis, it really depends on the state. Generally, the states, if they have authorized the sale of marijuana or legalized it in any capacity, it's for 21 and over. Some states have it just for medical, and some have it for recreational, and some have it for decriminalization. In research for tobacco, we have over 50 years of doing research on tobacco and its harm. Me personally, I've been doing this work for about 25 years. And then we have about 10 years of research just on vaping nicotine. Cannabis, we have a lot less research. Why? It's a Schedule 1 drug, so it's really difficult for us to get approved any study. So I can do studies, and I do studies giving adolescents a survey, and I ask them, adolescents and young adults, how much cannabis have you ever used? How much do you use? What kind of products do you use? What marketing do you know about? All that is fine, but I can't give a teenager cannabis, not that I would want to. I'm not saying that, but I can and actually do physiological studies to understand the effects on it. Even my colleagues who do research on mice or other animals or cells, it's hard because of the legal restrictions on it. By the way, I'm not making a stance one way or the other. I'm just giving you the facts from a scientific perspective. Health messaging. We've had a lot of research that really has informed really good health messaging for many, many years. We had great anti-tobacco messaging, and it worked. Our numbers for tobacco went well below 10% across the country until e-cigarettes came on the market. But for cannabis, we just don't have as much messaging, which is what I love about Johnny's Ambassadors and some of the work my lab does and others across the country, where we're saying we're getting the word out about cannabis and its harms on teens and helping teens understand that these products are harmful and should not be used. And that's important. So I've done research where I've said to teens, what do you know about different products and how much are you use, how are you being taught? And most teens will say, well, we don't hear a lot about cannabis, so if you don't tell me, I think it's okay. So we need to get the word out as much as we can. All right. And then what about the legalization? If we legalize marijuana, what is that doing to youth in terms of perceptions and use? We know that the medical marijuana laws really do influence youth perceiving that the marijuana is less risky. So if it's legal, they think that it's probably okay to use. In terms of actual use, though, we've seen that use is largely the same in states that have legalized. However, that seems to be changing, and it seems to be a lagging behind. It seems like while it may be legal and then teens' perceptions change, the change in use seems to come later. And it's important to note that, remember, if it's illegal, it's usually illegal for somebody who's 21 and over. So even whether it's legal or not, it's still illegal for a teenager to use it. But it's more that it's changing the social norms by legalizing, and we're having that conversation across the country. And so it's making teens, if something's legal, it must be okay. And that's not the case. And that's how we have to talk to teens. All right, so how has cannabis changed over the years, and what are some of the names? So just thinking about what, you may think to yourself, Bonnie's using cannabis and marijuana. What do teens use? Well, here are some of the names that teenagers are using to call these products. And the reason why I say this, and I have a 21 and 25-year-old, and when I say cannabis, they look at me and say, come on, mom. And if I say pot, which is what my generation would use, they also still roll their eyes. They use weed, but they also use dank or bud or tree or broccoli, other terms that are there. And one of my take-home messages at the end will be that it's important to use the same terms that teenagers are using, so that way you and your kids are talking on the same level, and you're using the same words so they understand you. So THC concerns, really important to note, and Laura alluded to this, and I alluded to this earlier, that THC today is not what it was when I was a kid or when my parents were kids or their parents. It is different. It is at least 10 times stronger today. So if you smoke one joint today, It's equivalent to 10 joints when I was a kid. It is 10 times stronger today. And it could be even higher if you're using dabs or if you're using the highly concentrated wax. So it's really important to help teens understand, oh, you may have used it, which I never did, but you or other people when they, in the 60s, can't be that bad. No, it's a totally different product that we're seeing on the market today. So let me give you a little bit of information about this. So if you were to use a joint on a weekend, say pre-2000s, then if you think about a joint has about 4 milligrams of the THC, so about 4% THC, you may be getting about 4.5 milligrams of that THC. But today, if you're, for example, in Washington, then you multiply based on the concentration of that THC, you may be getting 300 milligrams in that joint. Very, very potent and part of the problem that we have today. There is no standard on these products, except for I know that some laws have been recently passed, but we have no federal standard because it's a Schedule 1 drug. It's illegal, period. So people who are growing it are kind of being able to do whatever they want. There's just no regulation on these products. All right, what about marketing? This is, very scary right now if you look at the amount of marketing that's out there. These are pictures of marketing and advertisements for a lot of different cannabis products. Now, if you're a teenager or a little kid, you're 10, 11, 12, and you're looking at these, you go, ooh, that looks good. I love Snickers, or I love Nutella, or I love gummy bears and gummy worms, and I love to drink soda pop. Well, that's what's happening. There's no regulation on the marketing right now around these, so they can market and have things that are pretending to be the Snickers or pretending to be a gummy bear. And these are very, very attractive to young people. We know that part of why young people are using these cannabis products is because they're flavored. It's the same thing with tobacco. If it tastes like tobacco, it tastes like cannabis, it tastes like grass, you're not going to use it. But if it tastes like chocolate or it tastes like gummy bears, that's something I want to use. And that's part of the problem we have too. And here's just more examples of what's going on and how similar these products are to products that are out there in everyday household, like the Klondike bars or Apple Jacks. Instead, it's amply jacked up. Again, these are not attracting adults. This marketing, and if you're interested in advocacy, it's one of the things we can do. This marketing is attracting our kids, and we need to stop allowing flavors and marketing like this to get our young people interested. All right, so let's talk about the body on cannabis. All right, so there are health effects. People say, oh, it's nothing. No, there's some pretty significant health effects, both physical and mental, that we need to be aware of. So let's talk about the science. The science is around both THC and CBD. CBD is the non-psychoactive, the non-addictive component. I'm mostly going to focus about THC, the tetrahydrocannabinoid cannabinol that's in, because that's the part that we're most concerned about with teens. But regardless, also, as I keep saying, inhaling, anything we inhale. So our brains developed and our lungs keep developing into our 20s. Anything that we put into our bodies as a teenager disrupts that. So a bunch of short-term effects that you can have if you're using cannabis, especially if you are vaping or smoking it. Red eyes, dry mouth, different skin sensations, memory loss, paranoia. You might have impaired motor coordination. A lot of people say, oh, you can drive after smoking weed. No, it impairs your physical ability. It impairs your motor coordination. And police officers can't always detect whether they can detect if you're drinking. It's harder for them to detect if you have marijuana in your system. We know about the munchies. We know that it gives a false sense of pleasure or bliss, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. Sometimes you can have delayed response. It alters your perceptions, your muscles relax, and you can have tachycardia or increased heart rate. So just some other side effects that you can have, some of them are same, but anxiety, bronchitis, gives you a very dysphoric sense. It can make you dizzy. So a lot of different side effects with these products. Now, important to know, and when we talk to our kids, it's important to say, you may not have these side effects. It may be that you feel nothing other than high, and maybe you have some of them, and maybe that you have very, very severe side effects. The problem is we can't predict which human is going to have which kind of side effects. It depends on genetics, it depends on your size, it depends on how much you've already ingested or inhaled of the product before, it depends on your metabolism, how quickly you process through the drug. It's really hard. So when I talk to teens, and this, by the way, is not just about marijuana, when I talk to teens about any drug or any risk behavior, I say the bad things may not happen right away, and it may not happen at all. But if they do, it's really bad. So why take that chance? And especially when we're talking about with cannabis, we really don't know who's going to have the significant and severe effects and who's not. And that's something that we need to talk to teens about so they don't take that chance. So some other things just to follow up, and sorry, the slide's coming out weirdly. Altered brain. So this is really important. Our brain continues to develop until we're around 25 or 26. Anything we put into our bodies that goes to the brain, nicotine, THC, any other drug, alters the brain chemistry. We also know that cannabis, especially inhaled, causes inflammation in lungs. And we're going to focus on lungs a little bit more. Heart rate, the pore muscle, and then also something called hypoemesis, where teens, and I think I may have another slide on this, but teens who are using a lot of cannabis are showing up to the emergency room and throwing up. I just had a medical doctor talking to me about this the other day. So in terms of marijuana and respiratory health, this is important to know that you might have phlegm, you might have a cough, lung illness, and we'll talk about that more, lung infection. It does change the immune system. Now, in terms of lung cancer, it's still out. We still don't know exactly about lung cancer because, again, we don't have the best research. But I can tell you, if you're smoking a blunt, which is a combination, again, of nicotine and the cannabis, and you're breathing that in, we already know that the tar that's in those cigar wrappers can have tar and other cancer-causing agents that you can get cancer from that. So we need more research on this, but we're pretty clear evidence that marijuana harms the lungs. So the marijuana smoke, and this is also relevant, especially if you're an advocate to multi-unit housing and secondhand smoke, whether it's marijuana or tobacco, but secondhand smoke laws and why I think they're so important. Marijuana is a biomass. And when you combust it, it has thousands of chemicals, including fine particles, and you breathe in those fine particles and it gets lodged deep in your lungs. So it can cause lung illness, and whether it's cancer, time will tell on that. So it can damage the respiratories. And like I said, blunts and vaping are not harmless. They are also full of harms that we need to be aware of. So you may have heard of something called EVALI or e-cigarette or vaping associated lung illness. We'd heard a lot about this in 2019. If you look on the left, and I'll tell you more about EVALI overall, but if you look on the left, you see healthy lungs. If you look in the middle, you see lungs that were injured from vaping. And what happened on the right is an actual patient. These are lungs who was hospitalized for 18 days, including 10 of which he was in a coma because of vaping. And we think it was marijuana. So unfortunately, the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, stopped keeping track of EVALI in February of 2020. Okay, all right, we had COVID, come on. I understand why they stopped keeping track because they had other things to do, but we still see EVALI. There were almost over 2,800 cases and almost 70 deaths reported to the CDC. It seemed like THC was involved in most, but we're not sure if all of the cases, but it seemed it was vaping something. It seems like it was mostly marijuana, and it was the vitamin E acetate in particular, which is the oily substance that binds to that product when you vape it and brings it through your body. And basically, this oily substance was collecting in the lungs and causing lung illness. But we still need more research, and unfortunately, and more data collection. Unfortunately, because the CDC stopped keeping track, we don't know how many actual EVALI cases were out there or are out there. But I talked to a lot of physicians, adolescent medicine doctors, emergency room doctors, hospitalist doctors who say they're still seeing EVALI, and it presents similarly to COVID and until you actually get a COVID test. So I bring this up to you as a parent. If you have a child who's coughing a lot, if you have a child who seems to be short of breath, it could be COVID, it could be a volley, it could be nothing. But please encourage them to see a doctor and take them to the doctor, and especially if you know that they're vaping, and get that seen right away so your child is not suffering bad illness. Let's talk about COVID. This is from a study that we recently published as well, but it was more on smoking and vaping, nicotine. We don't know as much about marijuana, but we do know that if you're smoking or vaping anything, that you weaken the lungs. We know that the novel coronavirus attacks the lungs. So it makes sense that if you have weaker lungs, that you're more likely to either get COVID or get severe COVID. And also we know that the hand to mouth, we know that teenagers are sharing they share their joints, they share their blunts, they share their vaping devices. And so they're more likely to expose each other and themselves to COVID. Also, you may take your mask off now, granted, things are a lot better now, thankfully, in terms of COVID. But if you think about it, why we may be seeing a relationship on a national level between smoking and vaping and COVID, you take your mask off and you're vaping or smoking near somebody, or you touch something or somebody that had COVID and bring it to your mouth. So we're not sure the extent to which marijuana is implicated here, but we definitely know smoking and vaping in general and COVID may be linked. All right. So I kind of already said this, but I want to remind you that I get a lot of people say, oh, cannabis is not addictive. No, it is addictive, and it's very addictive to our young people. And when you start as a teen, you are significantly more likely to become addicted than if you start something as an adult. Okay. So we know about 1 of 6 teens who are using some form of cannabis are addicted to it. Now, again, not everybody, but there are, and it depends on your metabolism and your weight and your history of addiction and your family's history of addiction. But 1 in 6, I don't want to play Russian roulette with my child, and hopefully you don't either. So it's something else to talk to them about. So the brain, let's just dive into this a little bit more. Research is showing and suggesting, like I said, addiction, no doubt. But cannabis also, and so I'm just going to take a little bit of my drink here because my mouth is dry, but not from cannabis. That if you are somebody who has who's using cannabis, in addition to addiction, because it impairs the brain, it impairs your learning, memory, attention, impulse control, decision making. It can change your academic performance and lower your IQ points. So it actually does that. So talking to teens and saying, look, I care about you. I care about school. That's what just talking to young people about cancer or about heart attack or about brain development in general. They don't always care about it, but you know what? It could affect your sleep. It could affect your IQ. It could affect your school performance. It could affect your ability to run or to do athletics. That's what teens care about today. They're not thinking 20 years in the future. So get them with things that they're thinking about today that could really have that hook to be able to bring them in and have that conversation about cannabis. We also know that the higher the dose, the more regular use, the greater your brain impairment, and that it doesn't just resolve. Once you change your cells, particularly your neuron cells, so your brain and the neuronal connections, that does not come back, that does not resolve. So let's start talking to teens before they start using cannabis. Now, clearly, if a teen is using, our goal is to get them to slow down and or stop. Obviously, stopping altogether is best, but trying to get them before and not get them to start at all, so we don't have this cycle of addiction going on at all. Let's see. I'm just going to play a second of this. Hopefully you can hear it. But we have on our website, on our Cannabis Toolkit website, which I'll mention again at the end. It was already mentioned. You have those links that Laura will provide. We have a whole bunch of 30-second to 2-minute videos. And this is one of them, of this guy named Ralph Cantor, who does a lot of teaching. We sat him down for 2 hours and had him teach to a group of teens, and then we filmed it because the guy's not doing a lot of teaching. He's getting older. He's a grandpa. Everybody loves him. And he does these chalk talks. He does it on the board, doesn't use slides. And then we got the fortune of taping him for 2 hours, putting that on YouTube and the website, but also slicing him into a few different small
Bonnie,
bits.
I
So
wanted you to
yeah.
know this platform won't allow it. We had to have
Oh,
preloaded it. I'm so
no
sorry.
problem.
But
No,
is
that was
that
my
the
fault.
link where people can go watch him? Stan.md/capped?
Yes, they will be able to find him.
I'll include that in the follow-up to everyone so they can make sure to go watch that. So sorry.
Right. No, I think that was my fault. I probably should have told you in advance. Not a problem at all. And better to save time for questions. So I mentioned to you about the cannabis hyperemesis syndrome. So this is teens who are using cannabis and showing up to the emergency room or home vomiting with abdominal pain. This is caused by long-term use. And thankfully, in this case, the symptoms do stop in a couple of days. I was talking to an adolescent medicine doctor the other day who said that they've got some kids hospitalized for days because of this syndrome. So again, if your son or daughter is coming to you and saying, I'm vomiting or I feel really ill or I have abdominal pain. Now, I'm not going to tell you how to parent. But I will give you some unsolicited thoughts from somebody who studied parenting and is a parent of, like I said, a 21 and 25-year-old and who's done research on this. The goal here is not to get angry or punish our kids. I would be, if I found out my kids were using these substances, I'd be angry, I'd be frustrated. But let's get them help. Saying, oh, how much are you using it? I'm really mad and you're grounded when they're throwing up. No, let's get them to the hospital. Let's get them to the doctor. You can deal with the other symptoms and the other issues and getting them help later. So right now, let's pay attention to our young people's syndromes and symptoms, coughing, abdominal pain, throwing up, and try to help them because that's important. Mental health, very important. Cannabis, particularly during the teens years, can result in hallucinations and paranoia, depression, anxiety. Now, teens who are depressed are also more likely to use cannabis, tobacco, other drugs because they're self-medicating. But also, it's the other way around that if they use these products, they're also more likely to experience depression and anxiety. Cannabis use is also 2 to 3 times more likely if you use it to have a diagnosis of psychosis, schizophrenia, some form of that. And younger people in particular, it seems to, now, these are only for people who are already prone to schizophrenia, already prone to mental health issue. I do want to make that clear, but we don't know who that is necessarily. And so it could be that you've got, a perfectly normal teenager who suddenly at 17 starts using these products, or 18 or 19, and it could speed up the fact that the psychosis that maybe was already going to happen, or maybe sort of flip them over, flip that switch. We don't really understand how it happens or why, but that seems to be very much a link. So going back to that Russian roulette situation, you don't know if you're going to be one of those teens to have this happen to you, and we don't want to chance it. Suicidality, which Laura sadly knows all too well. In youth and young adults, cannabis is associated with suicidality, with the suicide ideation, so the desire to commit suicide, as well as attempts and obviously some successes. So very, very highlight association here between using cannabis and suicidality. All right, going back quickly to secondhand smoke. So I'm sure as parents, a lot of you are advocates and would like to change the laws and change what's happening. So important to know that the secondhand smoke, so that's not you inhaling yourself, but standing next to somebody who is either vaping or smoking marijuana, and what happens to you. So the smoke that comes out of that big plume, contains chemicals about cadmium and chromium benzene, about 33 or more on the California Prop 65 list. I don't know about where you are. We know that secondhand smoke affects your cardiovascular system, not of the user, but of the person who's the recipient of being next to somebody who's using. And if you're a child next to somebody who's smoking THC, they actually have detectable levels of the THC. And they themselves, children and adults who are sitting next to somebody who is smoking or vaping marijuana, can also have dry mouth and headaches and coughing and so on. So, if you don't already, thinking about having restrictions and rules and policies in your house for smoking and vaping of anything, that it's not allowed in your house and not allowed anywhere near your house is important. And that's setting the social norms also, that these are harmful products and we don't want them anywhere near us. So we know of a study in Colorado that about half of the parents who were in Colorado who were smoking, if they were using, that their half of the children, their parents in the Colorado smoking cessation study, half of those children showed evidence of also breathing in some of that smoke. And yes, it can also affect the fetus if you're pregnant. So this was just a study. I'm not going to go into a lot of the basic science around here, but this is a friend of mine, Dr. Matt Springer at UCSF, who actually has this chamber, and he puts rats in there, and he puts in smoke either from cigarettes or from vaping devices or from marijuana, and sees how it influences circulation in their heart. And when he basically showed, I'm just going to show you the basic idea here, is that if the marijuana smoke, the secondhand smoke, was in that chamber for 1 minute, it lowered their FMD, which is basically the circulation of the blood and the heart rate in the body. It lowered it for at least 90 minutes. So showing that even just for an animal in a chamber exposed for just 1 minute to THC can affect their respiratory system. All right. So I'm going to finish up with how can you help? So a few things, and I've alluded to these, but just to give you some specific recommendations. Talk to your teenagers, talk to your young adults, talk about anything and everything as often as you can. Bring it up, and that's important. Teens say if you don't talk, then you're basically telling me it's okay. So talk about the dangers. Now, it's important. Teens don't listen to a laundry list of talk. That's what they don't want to hear. But saying things like, I went to this talk and I heard somebody talking about these things, this woman from Stanford, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. Just talk, and I'll give you a little more information about that. If you think your son or daughter is using, talk to a healthcare provider. Now, depending on the state, some states don't require parental permission to talk to the kids. And you may say, come on, as a parent, I want to be there and want to understand. I will tell you, not as a parent, but also as somebody in healthcare, that most important is we get teenagers to talk to somebody. And as much as you may want to be the one they talk to, I always say to my own children as they were growing up, even still, if you can't talk to me, talk to your aunt, talk to your sister, talk to a friend, but talk to somebody, including a healthcare provider. So we want to encourage that. Talk to your county public health department. We unfortunately don't have a lot of national or local real good cessation methods for teens who are vaping or smoking or using cannabis, period. We have it more for nicotine, even that we don't have great ones, but we just don't have a lot out there. So talk to your local county health department. I know in California, they do receive funding to help treat and intervene with young people who are addicted to nicotine. There are addiction doctors. If you can't find them, shoot me an email. Happy to try to help you, but find out what those resources are in your county. So starting the conversation, again, it's not a lecture, it's a conversation. Find the right time. I had a friend who would say, I'm going to schedule the talk for, June 30th. No, you can't schedule this. My kids would laugh that I was the expert in finding the opportune time to raise issues. Again, go home. Hey, I heard this talk. Or you see something on TV and you say, oh, you know what? That reminds me. I'm curious about this. And just bring it up. Ask them what they think. You may not find out whether or not they're using immediately. And that may not be the goal. You may not need to. You want to say things like, look, if your friends are using, if you're using, I really want to make sure that you're getting some help and that you're aware of these problems and you're aware of the things that I'm concerned about. I'm worried about you. You can make a verbal contract or a written contract that if you're out using, you can come and tell me you're using and I will not bust you. I will help you. So, again, everybody has different parenting styles, but that is what the science shows is the best way. Using the right words, again, weed or pot, well, pot's outdated, but weed or stick or broccoli and not cannabis, even though I'm using that for parents. So what are some behavioral indicators? Changes in clothing, depression, withdrawal. If they're more moody or irritable, okay, teens are always moody or irritable, but beyond the normal. If they're not talking to you, if you're finding that they're having trouble in school, Or like I said, if they're coughing, throwing up, having headaches, those are signs that you may need to get them some help. So with some resources, and Laura will provide these more, we do have our cannabis awareness and prevention toolkit. This is mostly, the audience are mostly schools. So if you are affiliated with schools who are not doing tobacco or cannabis prevention, these are completely free resources. We have tons of curriculums on here. We do free trainings, and we just got some new funding to be able to do this. So if you are working with schools, middle or high school, and to be honest, we'll go younger, we'll go older, spread the word. But you as parents can also go on these toolkits and find lots of information. Some of the slides I presented, many more slides, I should click that, more activities and information and resources for you to talk to your teens about cannabis. And Cahoots are a fun game that you can use as well. We also have a new visit website. This is Vaping Information Solutions and Interventions Toolkit, brand new, just got launched a couple months ago. We're still building a lot more information here, but it's for healthcare providers to be able to talk to their patients, their kid patients, child patients, and teens, and to parents. But again, you as parents can visit as well for lots of information. And by the way, we're constantly adding new information on these toolkits, so keep coming back to them. So the goals of Visit, if you work with healthcare providers, to provide healthcare providers with the most up-to-date information to help screen, counsel, and treat. And do follow us on social media. We push out all kinds of advocacy opportunities, and other things there. And I will stop sharing, I guess, and happy to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Wonderful. Bonnie, this is incredible. And all of these resources, by the way, everyone, are completely free, just like they are here at Johnny's Ambassadors. And I have looked at them and they are wonderful. And if you know teachers, educators, they're great resources for schools. I'm very excited about the new visit kit. I'm sure that is going to be wildly popular as well. And hopefully the CDC will start tracking those EVALI numbers again. I don't know. We'll see. We do have some questions. Everyone, please, if you have questions, Bonnie has a hard stop here in 12 minutes, so let's ask her as many questions as possible. You're talking to an award-winning researcher here from Stanford. Okay, just saying. All right, first questions. Are the big food corporations going after, meaning suing, the edibles industry for stealing all of their brands and logos and packaging? This person sounds just incredulous. How are they getting away with these knockoffs? Isn't this a huge intellectual property infringement? And how are they getting away with it?
It's a great question, and unfortunately, I only have half an answer. And the answer is in the tobacco, or more in the e-cigarette, the nicotine e-cigarette vaping. Yes, because the vaping products were doing the same thing. They were saying, you know, we taste like Reese's peanut butter, or we taste like, you know, Cheerios or something like that. And the food industry did sue and tell the nicotine vaping companies that they had to stop doing that. So now they'll say we taste like peanut butter and chocolate instead of Reese's peanut butter.
Okay.
So yes, I don't know about it for the cannabis. It's a really good question. I would hope so, and my gut feeling is yes, because of the fact that they did it for nicotine vaping, but I don't know. You're absolutely right, though. It's appalling what is happening out there. It's absolutely appalling, and so you know, you sound so motivated. I realized I didn't have that last slide. Laura, you're welcome to give people my email, and you can talk, and I'm happy to help you find that out.
Great. I'll provide that in the follow-up email, where we will send all the links to the toolkits and the videos and some of the other resources that you kindly provided. Okay, the next question is, what is the impact of these products in emergency rooms? Is it worse for edibles or dabbing?
I don't know the numbers for one or the other. I think it's worse for dabbing, but what we're hearing is in the emergency room and the problem is that if you can encourage anything, we're doing this in our lab, is we are now starting to ask the questions to teens, not just do you use cannabis, do you use marijuana, or do you use weed, but what specifically. And that's been the problem, is most studies don't really tear apart exactly what it is that teenagers are using. It's the same thing in the emergency room. If you think about it, you go to the doc, and we want them to focus on the patient and less on the questions, but they don't generally say, what are you using specifically? Generally, what's charted is check. I've used one of the, yes or no to
I
using
use
cannabis at
marijuana.
all. Right, I used marijuana and that's it. So it's one of the things that I think we need to do a really better job. We're finally doing this in tobacco. We're saying healthcare providers, you need to track, were they using a cigarette or were they vaping, because we need to understand this better, and we need to do the same thing around marijuana. So it's a great question, and we don't have a lot of answers. But talking to friends who are physicians, we're seeing both, but dabbing is the one that's more serious that I'm more concerned about.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. We see in Colorado, in our Healthy Kids Colorado study that comes out every couple years, and just added dabbing in 2015, because that's really when these heavy concentrates, at least here, started to flood the market. And we are seeing trends for smoking going down, but the dabbing going way up, and the vaping going up, and the edibles. And as you pointed out, how much more potent those products are. And even in our flower here in Colorado, when you use marijuana, our higher potency flower is 28, 30%, so it's still incredibly potent, not like the pot, as you mentioned, when we were kids. So I can see how really anything would be dangerous. But yeah, the dabbing is a huge problem, at least here in Colorado. That's our big concern too. Okay. Oh, great presentation. Any thoughts on this issue? He would like to know, will restrictions on THC potency sold in dispensaries create more incentives for the black market to target youth with high potency products? Do you know much about kind of the regulation side of it?
So a little bit, again, I know a little more on the nicotine than I, but first of all, I will say, don't let the black market concerns stop us from doing the proper advocacy and regulations, because we're always going to be concerned about about black market. And if you do something like that, then you're never going to do any regulation. And so that's one thing I would say. The other thing I would say is, technically all these products are black market because they're all illegal, especially for somebody under 18 or under 21 for a kid. So, just to sort of be a little bit on my soapbox to put that in perspective. But in terms of, there are concerns about the THC and EVALI may have been because of black market or unregulated products. I'm not going to give my opinion on regulation per se, but the good thing about regulation is we monitor how much is in these products. The bad thing is you give the impression that these products are safe and should be used or okay to use. But so I don't think the black market is the ones that we're worried about marketing to teens. I think what's marketing to teens are the ones that are legal, and we need to regulate the marketing. And then the other thing, the way that teens are marketing to each other is to each other. Teens are encouraging each other. They're saying, look what I just smoked, look what I just used, you want to try it. So I do think marketing is a huge problem. It's a huge problem, but I'm less worried about the marketing from the black market.
I would agree. In fact, in Colorado, just yesterday, a historic bill 1317 was signed by Paulus, and I had the pleasure of being there at the signing with a photo of Johnny. And the THC potency issue, I think for us was more that he was able to get a medical marijuana card at 18 legally, simply by lying. We still don't know who gave it to him and what he said, but you can pay a pot shop doctor here in Colorado $500 and get your med card and legally go to the dispensary and buy shatter, which before this bill was 40 grams, which if you take a gram and divide it into 10 servings, that's 400 servings of dab a day. I mean, no teen is using that on their own. So that we're more concerned with, you know, that gray market, quote unquote, it's called, meaning illegally selling it to the younger children, but legally buying it, you know. So
Exactly.
whether it's 60%, 80%, you know, it doesn't matter what the cap is. It's an easy conduit to get these drugs to other children, and there's no black market involved, you know. So I think there's a lot of guardrails that hopefully other states will be looking to Colorado to see what we succeeded in doing with a very strong parent education school coalition to bring these changes and regulate this potency. And now we have this research that's funded $1 million to hopefully come back and look at what would be a logical cap. The point being to keep it away from all of these children. Middle school, you mentioned. I mean, we've got to do something.
Well, and when you're looking at vaping, anything, it's even going to the 3rd and 4th graders because it smells and tastes good, so they see it and they start using it. And so we absolutely have to regulate, and we have to enforce the regulation too. Because what you're saying, Laura, you know, it's great to have a bill, and congratulations, it's a huge bill, but we also have to enforce it. And that's where you know, we're also going to be helpful with the black market. So as parents, you know, I get parents who email me and say, oh, there was, you know, I found out a store was selling illegally to somebody under 18 or under 21. Again, it's generally 21. Then, and we report, and you need to report, and parents have to be vigilant.
Yes. And I think it's so critical you're pointing out that if you start with vaping, how much easier it is to go to THC, because so many teens think, oh, it's just Juul, it's harmless, but it does lead to other things. So I really love that part of your presentation.
Absolutely.
Can you clarify if cannabis is an approved medical treatment for anxiety and or depression?
Approved by the FDA? I don't think so. I'm not really sure.
Yeah, for the FDA medications, I know they're not, they're more for seizures, you know, severe autism. Cannabis is for, you know, cancer patients, certain eating disorders. The research I've read shows, I don't know if you have, that cannabis use actually creates more anxiety and depression. One of our scientific advisory board members is Dr. Eric Messamore. I don't know if you've met him, but I'd love to make an introduction.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. He says it's not good for depression. Is that what you've heard also?
Well, and that's exactly what I was saying in my slide earlier. It's not good for depression. It's and it's not good for ADHD. So I wouldn't. And my husband's an oncologist. He doesn't practice anymore. He's a researcher. But you know, he would get patients to come, and he would say, you know, you can use it, but I would prefer that you're finding other ways to deal with. Now, you know, nausea and appetite, yes, but don't smoke it and don't vape it, because you're also causing lung issues. And FDA, by the way, is not going to actually authorize THC for anything, because it's a Schedule 1 drug. It would be illegal for them to do that. So they could do for CBD, but not THC, is my understanding.
You know, that's interesting that for nausea, you can use it FDA approved. And of course, it's a very, very minuscule dose. In the FDA approved doses, you know, 2.5 milligrams of THC with an equal amount of CBD, that it works medically for certain cases of nausea. But then you just mentioned like the you know, the CHS, the hyperemesis syndrome, that it can cause the opposite effect if you use too much of it. I just find that fascinating.
That's exactly right. Yeah. No, it's
okay. All right. I know I've got 2 more minutes. So what do you think of drug testing? Someone wants to know.
Oh, okay.
Okay. I know you've only got 2 more minutes. We'll let you close with that one.
All right, I will tell you quickly, and again, feel free to email me with other questions. So first of all, depending on which state you live in, it's illegal for a parent to require drug testing for an adolescent doc or a physician, because that's all confidential. So you can't actually take your kid to a doc and say you need a drug test. The docs won't do it in most states, depending. But you can buy them. I will admit I'm not a fan of them. I'm a fan of talking. I understand why people want a drug test. You can get false positives, you can get false negatives, and then what are you going to do? You're going to totally lose the trust of your kid. Talk, monitor, go into your kid's room, look in their backpacks, smell. Are your kids opening up the doors a lot and the windows? That's I'm a big proponent in. Actually, the drug testing, I'm not. Now, I actually haven't looked at the literature if anybody has done a study to show whether it's actually effective. But when I talk to doctors, physicians, they agree with me where they say you're going to get false positives, you can get false negatives, and what are you going to do with the data? So I'm not a fan.
And we're not doctors, so I mean, we wouldn't know if we had false positives or
You would not know.
what that looked like. I had
Exactly.
one person tell me she used it successfully, but it was part of a broader intervention with the child psychologist that there would be incentives for a negative drug test, but the child voluntarily participated in that case. That's the
Yeah.
only one time I'd heard of it. Okay, I think that is it. We are at 1 hour and a hard stop, Bonnie. I want to thank you so
Yes.
much for the gift of your time today and your knowledge. Congratulations again on your award. I've been delighted to get to know you and to be involved with your work, and we will have lots of follow-up for you here. So thanks
Sounds
again
good.
for
Thank
joining
you.
us at Johnny's Ambassadors. All right,
Thank
take care,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.